She didn't go looking for anyone that morning. The plan was simple: milk, bread, back home, lock the door. But fate had other plans. Behind a grocery store, in a pile of discarded boxes and ice, she saw them, two puppies, barely breathing, curled together like they knew no one else would come. And in that moment, everything she thought she'd left behind came flooding back. The cold was different here, like it came up from the ground instead of down from the sky. Sergeant Hale tightened the strap on his vest and adjusted the scarf around his neck as the patrol team moved quietly through the remains of the village. What had once been homes were now just skeletons of stone and timber, the war chewing through everything but the dirt beneath their boots. Coda, his K9, padded ahead. The dog's ears flicked back every so often, checking in. Hale didn't need a command leash with him anymore. They'd been through too much. Syria. Afghanistan. Now here, this border zone no one could even pronounce. The village was dead silent. No gunfire. No radios. No life. Just the dry crack of frost underfoot and the soft rustle of wind slipping through shattered windows. They'd come on a tip, intel suggesting someone was hiding out here. Insurgents. Possibly a weapons cache. The drone feeds had shown nothing. But command wasn't taking chances. They fanned out and swept the first half of the village. Nothing. Just hollowed out homes and burned out stories. When Hale reached the far side of the rubble line, he paused. Coda had stopped in the middle of the path. Not tense. Not tracking. Just still. Hale watched him. Coda, he said quietly. The dog's ears flicked again. Then, without warning, he turned, slowly, and trotted toward one of the half-collapsed buildings. Hale followed. The rest of the team was sweeping east. He clicked his comm once, standard following lead signal, and slipped inside the ruined hut. The roof had partially caved in. The floor was packed dirt, frozen and cracked. A fire had been here once, long ago. Black soot still stained the far wall. Coda was already at the back of the room, tail stiff, head lowered. Hale scanned the shadows with his flashlight. Nothing. Then, movement. A faint shiver. A shape, small, hunched, just beyond the reach of the beam. Coda didn't growl. Didn't move. Just watched. Hale stepped forward. And that's when he heard it. A voice. So soft, he wasn't sure it was real. Can you take me home? The boy couldn't have been more than 7. He was barefoot. Wrapped in a threadbare jacket at least 2 sizes too big. His eyes were huge, sunken. His hair was tangled, streaked with ash. One of his knees was bleeding. But what hit Hale the hardest was the way he looked at Coda. Not afraid. Not startled. Hopeful. Like he already knew the dog would protect him. Hale crouched low. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice calm. "It's okay. You're safe now." The boy didn't speak again. He looked at Hale, then at Coda. Then back at Hale. "Coda," Hale said, motioning slightly. The dog stepped forward, slowly, tail low but wagging. The boy reached out a shaking hand. And Coda licked his fingers. That was it. The dam broke. The boy collapsed forward into Coda's side and began to sob. No words. No sound. Just tears and trembling shoulders. Hale called for medevac support and backup. Whatever mission they thought they were on, it had just changed. Back at base, the medics checked the boy. No major injuries. Some bruising. Minor frostbite. Dehydration. He hadn't spoken since that single sentence. No name. No language. At least not one anyone recognized. They suspected a local dialect, something remote. A translator was brought in, but the boy didn't respond. He just sat curled on a cot in the far corner of the room, one hand gripping the corner of a wool blanket, the other resting on Coda's back. Coda hadn't left his side. Not once. Not to eat. Not even when Hale tried calling him away. The dog simply wouldn't move. The boy didn't flinch when soldiers entered or exited the room. He didn't cry when the medic changed the bandage on his knee. But every night, around the same time, he would lean over toward Coda's ear, press his lips close, and whisper something. No one else could hear. No one else knew what he said. But Coda did. And whatever it was, it kept the dog still. Kept the boy calm. And slowly, the nightmares started to fade. After 4 days, Hale got permission to take the boy outside for a walk. They didn't go far, just around the perimeter fence, under watch. The boy didn't ask questions. He didn't laugh. But when he saw a bird take off from a fence post, he smiled. Just once. And when he turned to Coda, he whispered again. Soft. Just like that first night. Hale sat that evening with a cup of coffee and watched the boy draw in the dirt with a stick. Who are you, kid? He muttered. Coda lifted his head, ears twitching. And across the yard, the boy turned. Just for a second. Eyes locked. Then looked away. Like he knew Hale had asked. And wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. The base command wasn't sure what to do with the boy. There were no records of missing children in the area, at least none that matched his age and description. No nearby villages had reported a survivor. No families had come forward. He didn't carry identification. No papers. No tags. Just a torn patch sewn into the inside of his coat, frayed, illegible. The soldiers' call signs nicknamed him Echo. Because he didn't speak. Because when he did whisper, it was never to people, only to Coda. And every time he did, Coda responded like it was the most important thing in the world. Hale spent his evenings trying to break through the silence. He'd been patient, deliberate. Sat next to Echo for hours at a time. Drew pictures in a notebook. Offered food he knew kids liked. But nothing worked. Until the night he brought out the map. It was standard satellite imaging, nothing detailed. Just topography, rivers, roads, what was left of them. Hale unrolled it on the cot beside Echo and handed him a pen. The boy looked at it. Then at Coda. Then at Hale. Do you know where your home is? Hale asked gently. No answer. But Echo took the pen. And made a single mark. A small circle near the edge of the region. Then handed the pen back. Hale reported the location to command. A recon drone was dispatched. Nothing obvious. Just forest. But a ridge nearby showed signs of unnatural clearing. Possibly a road. The next day, Hale requested permission to take Echo there. Command hesitated. But eventually, they agreed, under escort. The boy didn't speak the entire drive. He sat in the back seat with Coda, one hand tangled in the dog's collar. Hale checked the mirror every few minutes. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, tears? Fear? Excitement? But Echo just watched the road. Like every mile passing was another breath he'd held too long. They reached the forest line just after noon. It was quiet. Still. Too still. Hale got out first, scanning the area. The ridge led down into a shallow basin, where the remnants of an old logging path twisted through trees and brush. Echo stood at the edge of the trees, staring down the path. He took a step forward. Then another. Hale followed, Coda between them. They walked for nearly an hour. No signs of recent activity. No homes. Just forest. Then, Echo stopped. He knelt beside a patch of earth and brushed away the leaves. A flat stone lay beneath. He tapped it once. then whispered something to Coda. Hale crouched beside them. There were markings on the stone, carved by hand. Letters and numbers. A name. A date. Elias. Hale looked at the boy. Is that you? The boy didn't respond. He just reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small wooden figure. A dog. Rough, handmade. He placed it on the stone, then stood and walked away. They found the remains of the house another 100 yards down the trail. Or what used to be one. Just foundation stones now. A scorched frame. A bed frame rusted and collapsed. A broken lantern, half buried in moss. Echo didn't go near it. He just stood at the edge of the clearing. Hale stood with him. Coda sat between them, unmoving. Is this where you lived? Hale asked. Echo nodded. Once. Barely perceptible. They returned to base in silence. But something had changed. That night, when Hale came to check on him, Echo was drawing in the dirt with his finger. When he saw Hale, he wiped it away quickly. But not before Hale saw the shape. It was a dog. With wings. Over the next few days, Echo opened up. Not with words, but with gestures. He pointed to things. Drew pictures. Started humming soft, uncertain melodies. And when Coda was nearby, the boy leaned close and whispered again. One night, Hale finally asked, What do you say to him? Echo didn't answer at first. Then, barely audible, he said, I tell him thank you. For what? For not leaving me. That was the first full sentence Echo spoke to Hale. And from then on, the whispers became more frequent. Not just to Coda. To Hale. To the medic. To the translator. He still didn't talk much, but the dam was broken. He was trying. When a new team rotated into base 3 weeks later, one of the younger soldiers offered Echo a chocolate bar. Echo took it with both hands, smiling. Thanks, he said clearly. The soldier blinked. You speak English? Echo nodded once. Little. And just like that, another piece of the mystery cracked open. That night, Echo curled up beside Coda, tracing something into a sheet of paper Hale had given him. It was a drawing of a man in uniform. A woman with braided hair. And a child between them, holding the leash of a dog. Hale sat beside him, watching. Is that your family? Echo looked up. And this time, he answered. No. That's the family I want. Days turned into weeks, and the base began to feel different. Quiet. Less frantic. The war had paused for a moment, but the soldiers who remained carried the weight of it with every step. Echo, however, seemed to breathe in the stillness like it was something new. He had started to smile more, slow, shy smiles, but smiles all the same. And Coda? The dog seemed to understand, as he always had. When Echo ran to him, Coda's tail would thump softly, like a reassurance he didn't need words for. Sometimes, Echo would lay his head on the dog's flank, eyes closed, whispering something only Coda could hear. It was a bond formed in silence, one stronger than anything Hale could have imagined. But it wasn't just the boy and the dog that were changing. Hale, too, was starting to believe something. He didn't know what yet, but he couldn't deny the shift that had happened. One evening, as the sun set behind the barren hills, Hale sat outside, watching the sky turn pink and orange. Echo sat nearby, sketching something in the dirt again. Coda lay by Hale's feet, content to just be there. Do you miss it? Hale asked quietly, not sure if the boy would answer. Echo looked up, brow furrowed. Hale continued. Your home. Your family. The boy was silent for a long time. The kind of silence that told Hale the boy had been thinking about it for a while. Finally, Echo nodded once, slowly. Sometimes. But not always. No, Echo's voice was small. I had to leave them. Hale didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Echo had already told him what he needed to know. The boy had lost something, someone, and in his own way, he was trying to piece it together again. The dog. The sketches. The whispers to Coda. He was trying to get back what he had lost. A few days later, the team was called to assist in an operation near a nearby town that had been recaptured from hostile forces. Echo hadn't been involved in any missions, but Hale couldn't bring himself to leave him behind, especially now that he was talking more. He wasn't sure how much Echo understood about the world of soldiers in combat, but it didn't feel right to leave him at base, surrounded by the same soldiers who had kept their distance for so long. You're with me, Hale said as he walked to the tent where Echo was staying. The boy was fiddling with a map, a look of concentration on his face. Echo didn't look up at first. He had been drawing again, this time tracing lines over and over. You're coming with me, Hale repeated. We're heading out. Echo nodded without question, standing up and reaching for his worn-out boots. He didn't ask where they were going, and Hale didn't offer an explanation. There was no need. The mission was a quiet one, no firefights, no explosions. It was just a retrieval of supplies from a warehouse in a zone that had been deemed cleared. The team moved fast, unloading crates, ensuring there were no threats hidden in the storage containers. Echo stood a few paces away, leaning against a wall, watching Hale. Coda sat at his feet, keeping watch. Hale had taken the time to teach Echo some basic signs over the last few weeks, just simple hand signals to let the boy know if danger was near. As they were about to leave, a faint noise echoed from the far end of the warehouse. The others didn't hear it at first. But Coda's ears perked. Hale signaled for everyone to stop. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he motioned for Echo to stay low. He and Coda moved toward the sound, barely making a sound. The rest of the team followed behind, fanning out. A door creaked open in the far corner, and Hale held his breath. Stay close, he whispered to Echo. The boy didn't argue, nodding, his grip tight on Coda's leash. The noise had stopped, but Hale wasn't taking any chances. He moved slowly, inching closer, Coda leading the way. Then, nothing. Coda stopped, nose down, tail straight. He had found something, but there was no immediate threat. They crouched low and moved into the corner. Behind a stack of crates, a single figure crouched, hands raised in surrender. It wasn't an enemy soldier. It was a woman. She was thin, dirty, her eyes wide with fear. And as Hale moved closer, he saw what she was holding in her arms, a child. The woman looked up, eyes darting to Coda. Then to Hale. Please, she whispered. Please don't hurt us. Hale's heart pounded. The woman had been hiding in the warehouse. But it wasn't the warehouse that had drawn her here. It was something more. The child in her arms was small, smaller than Echo. Who are you? Hale asked gently. She looked at the ground, then at the child. We're not with them. We're just trying to survive. The child's eyes, wide, scared, and pleading, made Hale's chest tighten. And then, just as quickly, he thought of Echo. Of the silent whispers to Coda. He glanced back at the boy, still standing in the doorway, and saw something in his eyes. Recognition. The boy didn't speak. But his body language told a story Hale couldn't ignore. The woman didn't speak much more. But Hale and his team brought them both back to base. They provided food, medical care. And as the evening wound down, Echo sat alone by the fire, still and quiet. Coda lay beside him, his head resting on the boy's knee. The woman and child had been hidden by insurgents, taken to use as leverage, but they had escaped in the chaos. Echo knew what it was like to be alone. To hide. To escape. And now, for the first time, Hale saw the boy not as a mystery, but as someone who had lived through things he'd never imagined. As the stars appeared in the sky above, Echo leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Can we help them?" Hale looked down at the boy, then at Coda, who simply looked back at him, steady and calm. "Of course we can," Hale said quietly. The woman and child, Maria and her younger brother Tomas, had been hiding in the warehouse for 3 days before Hale's team found them. The child's condition was worse than expected. Tomas was feverish, his breathing shallow, and his body shaking with chills. He hadn't eaten properly in days, and Maria hadn't had the strength to keep him warm during the long, cold nights. Hale and his team rushed them back to base, where the medics immediately set to work. They were given warm blankets, food, and fluids to stabilize them. Maria's eyes never left Tomas as the medics worked. She stayed quiet, murmuring words to him in a language Hale didn't understand, but the love in her voice was clear. Echo, still with Coda by his side, watched them from a distance. The boy hadn't said anything since they'd brought them in, but Hale noticed how Echo's eyes followed Tomas, how his hand reached down to gently pat Coda's back. It was strange, the way the boy had connected with the soldiers and their dog. He'd gone from barely speaking to offering what little he had. But now, with Maria and Tomas in the medical tent, something in Echo seemed to shift. He wasn't just the silent boy in the background anymore. He was more. He had a role. Hale stepped up to him, looking down at Coda, who was resting at the boy's feet. "Are you okay?" Hale asked, his voice low. Echo nodded, though his eyes still lingered on Tomas, who was now resting on a cot under the medic's watch. "They'll be fine," Hale reassured him. "They're safe now." Echo nodded again, though Hale wasn't sure he believed it. There was something about the boy that spoke of far too much loss for him to easily forget. The night passed quietly. The next morning, Hale was assigned to help secure the perimeter around the base. The threat of enemy combatants was always looming, and though they hadn't seen any activity near their location recently, they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As he checked the base's security systems and ran drills with the other soldiers, he thought about Echo again. The boy was different. Not just in the way he carried himself now, but in how he connected with people, more specifically, how he connected with Coda. The bond was undeniable. It was a silent understanding that passed between them. Coda had become Echo's lifeline in ways Hale couldn't fully comprehend, but it was obvious that the dog provided something far beyond companionship. Coda had become a safeguard, a protector, and a healer in ways that no human could replicate. As Hale walked back to the barracks that evening, he spotted Echo and Coda near the edge of the camp. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the ground, and Coda was lying next to him, head resting on the boy's lap. It was a peaceful scene, one of the few moments of calm in the chaos of their environment. Hale approached quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. But Echo noticed him anyway, glancing up with a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. "You okay, Echo?" Hale asked softly. The boy nodded, his fingers gently running through Coda's fur. For the first time in a long while, Hale saw something like hope flicker in Echo's eyes. "Can you teach me how to be like him?" Echo asked, his voice almost a whisper. Hale blinked. "What do you mean?" "Like Coda. Like him. Calm. Strong." Hale chuckled softly. "Coda's got a way about him. But I think you've got it in you already." Echo's brow furrowed, confused. "Coda's not just strong," Hale explained. "He listens. To everything. Even when no one's saying a word, he knows." Echo's eyes softened. He looked down at Coda, who had raised his head slightly, as if he understood the conversation. "You're already like him," Hale continued. "Maybe not now, but you've got the same strength. You just have to listen." The boy didn't speak, but he nodded, his hand gently patting Coda's side. Later that week, a larger operation moved in. A convoy of trucks rolled through the base gates, carrying more soldiers, equipment, and supplies. The team was gearing up for a new mission, a high-risk strike that could turn the tide in the region. Hale would be involved, but this time, he wasn't sure how much Echo would be able to contribute. The mission was dangerous, and Hale wasn't prepared to risk the boy's safety. When the soldiers were briefed, Echo stood near the back, Coda at his side. He watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. His eyes never left Hale as the sergeant went over the mission plan. Before Hale could leave for his post, Echo approached him, holding something in his hand. It was the dog figurine. The same one Echo had carved all those days ago. The boy held it out to Hale with a shy look. "Take it," Echo whispered. "For luck." Hale took the figurine, running his fingers over the smooth wood. He didn't need luck, but he understood the sentiment. "I'll keep it safe," Hale said, slipping the small carving into his vest. Echo's eyes lit up for the first time in what felt like weeks. And for the first time, Hale realized something. This boy, who had survived on his own, who had whispered to Coda in the dark, who had been broken by things no child should face, he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And Hale wasn't about to let him go back to just surviving. The night before the mission, Hale sat alone in his quarters, checking over the operation details one last time. His gear was laid out in neat rows, but his thoughts kept drifting to Echo. The boy had changed. Not just in how he held himself, more confident, more present, but in how he saw the world now. Coda, resting by Hale's side, raised his head as the door to the room opened. Echo stood there, silhouetted in the doorway. The boy didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his small figure framed by the dim light. "You coming?" Hale asked, gesturing toward the cot. Echo nodded, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Without a word, he sat on the floor next to Coda, the dog's ears perking up as the boy scratched behind his ears. "I can't sleep," Echo whispered, looking at Hale. Hale didn't reply at first. He'd grown used to Echo's silences. The boy would speak when he was ready. "I think I'm scared," Echo finally admitted, his voice low. Hale looked up, his heart tightening. "It's okay to be scared. You're not the only one." Echo's eyes remained fixed on Coda. "Will he come back?" the boy asked. His voice broke the silence that had been hanging between them. "Who?" Hale asked, though he knew the answer. "Coach," Echo whispered. Hale didn't need to ask more questions. He knew the meaning behind the word. The boy's abuser. The man who had taken him, used him, and tried to break him. The man whose name had haunted Echo's dreams. "No," Hale said softly. "Coach isn't coming back." Echo didn't respond. He simply leaned his head against Coda's fur, eyes closed. Hale let the quiet settle in. Echo had been through more than any child should ever experience, and the weight of that was something Hale couldn't fully understand. But he was determined to make sure Echo didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The sound of soldiers moving in the hallway interrupted the moment. The mission was about to begin. The next morning, the convoy moved out, heading toward the strike point. The air was thick with tension, but Echo remained quiet, his eyes flicking to Hale and back to Coda. He seemed ready but uncertain, like he was still trying to process everything around him. Hale watched him carefully. He didn't know what Echo expected from the mission, but Hale wasn't about to let the boy get caught up in anything dangerous. His job was to keep the boy safe, and for the first time, that meant watching his back in a way that was different from the others. They moved through the town, the streets eerily silent, save for the occasional crackle of their radios and the soft thump of boots against the ground. Coda stayed close to Echo, his tail low but steady. As they reached the building, Hale signaled for the team to halt. A quiet radio call confirmed the target was inside. Echo didn't speak, but his hand was lightly gripping Coda's leash. The dog had become his anchor in the chaos, and Hale wasn't about to take that away from him. The team moved in, clearing rooms and securing the perimeter. They had been briefed on the structure, an old industrial building that had been converted into a hideout. The enemy was holed up inside, and their mission was simple: secure the area, take down the hostile forces, and retrieve any intelligence. It was meant to be a straightforward operation. Half an hour in, Hale found himself in the basement of the building, checking through storage crates. The mission was going smoothly, but his instincts kept pushing him forward, deeper into the shadows of the building. He was halfway through a hallway when a low growl caught his attention. Coda was ahead of him, ears perked and eyes focused. Hale signaled the team to fall back. They had encountered a few hostiles, but none of them were organized or aggressive enough to warrant further concern. Coda's low growl, however, had a different meaning. He wasn't responding to just any noise. He was tracking. And as Hale followed the dog's lead, he realized what Coda was sensing. They found them in an abandoned office at the far end of the building. A group of insurgents was holed up, moving quickly, trying to prepare for an ambush. But it wasn't their weapons Hale was concerned about. It was the sound of a child's whimpering that pierced the air. Hale's heart dropped. There, in the corner of the room, behind a stack of crates, crouched another child. A girl, no older than 5. Her eyes were wide with fear as Coda approached, sniffing cautiously. Without a word, Hale moved forward, his hand outstretched. The girl didn't move, but she didn't pull away either. Coda's calm presence had broken through her fear. And as Hale crouched beside her, she finally spoke. "Help me," she whispered. The next few hours were a blur. The insurgents were neutralized quickly, but the discovery of the girl, Anna, changed everything. She was hiding, alone in the building, no one to protect her. She was the one Echo had unknowingly led them to. The child he had sensed even before they entered the room. Hale couldn't understand how someone could leave a child to suffer like that, but the cold reality was clear. Echo had been in that position once before. And now, his dog had led them to the girl in need of the same help. After securing the area, Hale made sure Anna was safe. The child was terrified, but Hale couldn't help but think how much like Echo she was, so small, so vulnerable, yet so resilient. When they finally returned to the base, Hale sat with Echo in the quiet, the boy's eyes reflecting a level of understanding Hale wasn't sure how to express. Echo didn't say much, but as the boy looked at Coda, Hale knew something had changed. Echo had found someone else to protect. The days that followed the mission were filled with routine. The team debriefed, and the children, Echo and Anna, were kept safe in a temporary shelter while arrangements were made for their transport. But despite the action they had taken, something about the operation didn't sit right with Hale. He'd faced enemies before, seen too many battles up close, but this was different. These kids, hiding in plain sight, unnoticed by those who could have helped them, it left a scar deeper than any physical wound. Echo was quiet after that night. He didn't speak much, didn't show the usual signs of curiosity he had when he first arrived at the base. His eyes seemed more distant now. Like he was somewhere far away, hidden in memories he didn't want to remember. But every night, as the sun set and the base grew still, Echo would find Coda, sit down beside him, and whisper again. Not to Hale. Not to anyone else. Just to Coda. It was 2 weeks after the mission that Hale found Echo sitting by the fire, his small fingers tracing the edge of a broken clay pot. Coda lay next to him, eyes closed but still alert, as though he knew the boy needed space. "What are you doing, Echo?" Hale asked quietly. Echo didn't look up immediately. Instead, he placed the pot piece down on the ground and wiped his hands on his pants. Then he turned to Hale, his gaze steady but tired. "Trying to make it whole again," Echo said simply. Hale sat down next to him. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. "You've been through too much already." The boy looked at the broken pieces and then back at Coda. "But some things can't stay broken forever. If I try enough times, maybe it'll fit again." Hale nodded, understanding. Sometimes, we try to fix things that seem impossible, he said softly. But that doesn't mean we don't try. Echo glanced up at him, his eyes full of questions, but for the first time, they weren't filled with fear. There was a faint hint of hope there, like the weight of the past had started to lift, just a little. The following morning, Echo was different. He walked through the base with Coda by his side, head held a little higher, a small smile tugging at his lips. The soldier who had kept his distance was now stepping into a new world. And Hale was certain it had something to do with Coda, with the bond they shared, and the silent whispers that only they could understand. As the team prepared for a new deployment, Hale found himself looking at Echo more often. The boy wasn't just a survivor now. He was becoming something more. Hale couldn't quite define it. Perhaps it was the way Echo had started to trust, not just Coda, but Hale, and even the other soldiers. Perhaps it was the way he was no longer hiding in the shadows of his memories, but stepping forward into the light of possibility. One morning, after training drills, Hale sat down with Echo on the edge of the camp. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Echo handed Hale a small piece of metal, rusted, worn, but clearly important to the boy. It was another part of a broken item, a keepsake from his past. Hale took it, turning it over in his hand. "What is this, Echo?" "It's part of something bigger," Echo said quietly. "The piece I couldn't find." "Where does it go?" Hale asked, genuinely curious. Echo smiled, a small, shy smile. "Home." Days turned into weeks, and life at the base began to take on a routine. Echo had become a quiet but unshakable presence. His connection to Coda had only deepened, and with every passing day, the boy grew stronger, more confident, more willing to interact with the soldiers and even with other children who had been brought to the base for protection. Coda, as always, was by his side. It was the dog who had bridged the gap between Echo and the world. But the mission was never far from Hale's mind. The war wasn't over. The danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for any weakness. One evening, as the team prepped for another round of field exercises, Hale found himself speaking to Echo once more. "You know, you're more than just a survivor now," Hale said as the boy sat nearby, his eyes lost in thought. Echo didn't look at him, but he did answer. "I don't want to just survive anymore." Hale's heart tightened. For the first time, the boy was speaking the truth. The silent plea had been heard, not just by Coda, but by everyone who had taken the time to listen. "You're not alone, Echo," Hale said, his voice soft but firm. "Not anymore." Echo didn't respond immediately, but he did look up at Hale, his eyes clear and steady. "I know," he whispered. The team continued its missions, but Hale never took his eyes off Echo. The boy was healing in ways that Hale couldn't fully explain. He wasn't just recovering from the past, he was shaping his future. And through it all, Coda remained his constant. The quiet weeks at the base turned into months, and Hale found himself adjusting to the routine. He and his team would go on missions, work with the locals, and manage the base's security, but Echo remained a constant presence in his life. The boy, still quiet, still unsure of the world around him, had become something more than just a survivor. He had found a place among the soldiers and the refugees, a small family bound not by blood, but by shared experience and survival. Coda, as always, was by his side. Hale had come to understand something important during their time together. It wasn't just that Echo had found a way to survive, he had found a way to live again. The boy wasn't running from the past anymore. He was beginning to step into the future. But the peace didn't last. One morning, a new threat appeared on the horizon. Intelligence reports came through, detailing an increased insurgent presence in the region. Hale was briefed on the specifics: a raid on the nearby village. No one knew the full extent of it, but the enemy was more organized now. It was only a matter of time before the violence reached the base. It wasn't just a military operation anymore. It was personal. The children. The people they'd sworn to protect. Hale's team was put on high alert. The mission briefing was straightforward: secure the village, eliminate the threat, and extract anyone who needed help. But this time, Hale had to make a decision he wasn't prepared for. As the convoy headed out, Hale noticed something different in Echo's demeanor. The boy, who had been by his side for so long, seemed restless, more distant than usual. His eyes were unfocused, staring ahead, but Hale could see the tension in his shoulders. "Echo," Hale said, keeping his voice low. "What's going on?" The boy didn't respond at first. But when he did speak, his voice was quiet and steady, more confident than Hale had heard in a while. "You're going to fight," Echo said. Hale's heart skipped a beat. "We're securing the area. We're not fighting." Echo turned to him, his eyes wide with a calm intensity. "You will fight. And when you do, Coda will fight too. He's always ready." Hale looked down at Coda, who was resting his head on Echo's lap. The dog had been quiet, but Hale could feel the tension radiating from him. Coda was ready for anything, and Echo seemed to know it. "You're right," Hale said slowly. "We're all ready." But inside, Hale wasn't sure. The enemy was unpredictable. They had no idea how many were out there or what their strategy was. The only thing they had was each other. The convoy reached the village before sundown. The streets were eerily quiet. No civilians in sight. Just the silence of an empty place, waiting for the inevitable. Hale's team moved quickly, splitting into smaller groups, taking positions around the perimeter. Echo and Coda stayed with Hale, as always. The boy didn't flinch when Hale checked his weapon, didn't hesitate when Hale motioned for him to stay low. The village had been abandoned for the most part. But they still needed to clear it. It wasn't until they reached the center of the village that Hale realized the full extent of what was happening. The enemy had set up camp in the heart of the village. There were barricades. Armed men moving between buildings. Weapons. Ammunition. Everything they needed to launch an attack. And in the middle of it all, there were hostages. Hale moved swiftly, signaling his team into position. Coda's eyes were sharp, and Echo didn't need words to understand what needed to be done. He was ready. The first gunshots rang out before Hale could give the order to move in. "Take cover!" Hale shouted. But Coda was already moving. He ran forward, charging toward the enemy camp, his body low to the ground. Echo, without hesitation, followed him, running alongside the dog with a speed that surprised Hale. The boy was no longer afraid. He was in sync with Coda, moving as if they were one. Hale watched, stunned, as the dog and the boy worked together to neutralize the threat. It wasn't long before the other soldiers joined the fray, but Coda and Echo had already cleared the way. The enemy was outnumbered, and the hostages were safe. As the operation wrapped up and the dust settled, Hale approached Echo. The boy was kneeling beside Coda, who was panting, tired but unscathed. Echo was calm, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You did good, kid," Hale said, kneeling beside him. Echo looked up at him, his eyes serious but full of something Hale had never seen before: pride. "We did good," he said softly, nodding toward Coda. Hale followed his gaze. "Yeah, we did." Coda's tail thumped against the dirt. Hale stood, his hand on Echo's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Echo. You never will be." Echo nodded, his hand resting on Coda's head. For the first time since he'd arrived at the base, Echo wasn't just surviving. He was living. He was part of something bigger than himself. And Coda, always by his side, was the link that had kept him going. As the sun began to set, the village quiet once more, Hale watched the boy and his dog. They were both still, watching the horizon together. And in that moment, Hale knew something he hadn't realized before. Echo wasn't just a boy who had survived. He was a warrior in his own right. And with Coda by his side, nothing would ever break him again. The days following the mission were full of change for Echo and Coda. The boy's newfound confidence hadn't gone unnoticed. Soldiers who had once kept their distance were now speaking to him, nodding at him with respect. Echo, for the first time since he arrived at the base, was starting to fit into a world where people weren't afraid to acknowledge his presence. Hale watched all of this from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. But he knew, deep down, that it wasn't just the soldiers who had made a difference in Echo's life. It was Coda. Every night, without fail, Coda would sit by Echo's side, no matter where they were. The dog was always there when Echo needed him, and that silent companionship was the glue that had held Echo together. Without Coda, Hale wasn't sure if the boy would have ever felt the strength to speak, to trust, to live again. One evening, as the camp wound down after a long day of exercises, Echo and Hale sat outside, staring at the campfire. The stars were clear in the sky, and the air was cold, biting at the edges of their jackets. Coda was lying next to Echo, his head resting on the boy's knee. "You know," Hale said, breaking the silence, "you've been through a lot, Echo. I don't think anyone here understands exactly what it was like for you. But I think they see you now. I see you." Echo didn't say anything for a long while. He just stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he looked up at Hale, his eyes wide with sincerity. "I don't know what I'd do without him," Echo said, his voice quieter than usual. He nodded toward Coda. "He's never left me." Hale felt the knot in his throat tighten. "Coda doesn't leave anyone behind. You've both been through hell and back, and you made it." Echo's lips twitched into a small, rare smile. "He didn't leave me when I couldn't move. When I couldn't speak. He just stayed." Hale's chest tightened. It wasn't just the physical battles that had shaped them, Echo and Coda, it was the silent ones. The ones they fought in the quiet, when no one was watching, when they were alone. Coda's loyalty had never wavered, and neither had the boys. A few weeks later, the call came in. Another mission. Another risk. This time, it was an urgent situation, a new target, an emerging threat near the border, one that needed immediate attention. Echo had already proven himself in combat situations, but this mission was different. This time, Hale wasn't sure if he could protect him. "Echo," Hale said one night, as he prepared his gear, "I need you to stay behind this time. This mission is dangerous. I can't risk losing you." The boy didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes soft, resigned. "I know," Echo said quietly. "I'll stay with Coda." Hale felt the weight of that silence as he looked at Echo. There was no question. Echo had come to understand what it meant to be part of something. To trust. But he also knew that sometimes, protecting the ones you loved meant keeping them safe, even if it hurt. The mission itself was brutal. There was no easy way to explain it. The insurgents had set up camp near the border, heavily armed and fortified. Hale's team moved in under the cover of night, hoping to surprise them, but the enemy wasn't as disorganized as they had hoped. Gunfire echoed through the cold desert air. The team moved quickly, taking cover behind rocks and debris. The air smelled like dust, sweat, and metal. Hale's pulse raced as he scanned the area, the sounds of battle filling his ears. Coda was with him, always a step ahead, always focused. Hale moved cautiously, giving commands to his team, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Echo. The boy wasn't here. He was safe. He was back at the base. Hours later, the mission had concluded successfully. The enemy had been neutralized, and the team had secured valuable intelligence. Hale breathed a sigh of relief as they packed up, ready to head back to base. But something inside him felt incomplete. It was the nagging fear that had been with him ever since he'd left Echo behind. He hadn't realized just how much of a part of him the boy had become until that moment. Back at the base, Hale made his way to the medical tent first. His team was mostly intact, but the battle had left its marks. Some minor injuries. Cuts. Scrapes. A few soldiers with bruised ribs. Hale was fine, but his mind kept returning to Echo. When he finally reached the shelter where Echo was staying, he found the boy sitting by the fire, just like before. Coda was at his side, as usual. But this time, something was different. Echo looked up as Hale approached. "Everything okay?" Echo asked, his voice calm, but there was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding, a knowing that hadn't been there before. "Yeah," Hale said. "It's over." Echo nodded. He didn't need to ask the details. He already knew. "You can't keep me safe forever, can you?" Echo asked softly, his voice laced with a quiet fear. Hale sat down beside him, his voice steady. "No, I can't. But I'll always be here. Coda will always be here." Echo looked at Coda, who was now lying next to them, his head resting on the boy's lap. "And you'll always protect me?" Hale smiled gently. "Always." And in that moment, with Coda between them, Echo didn't need to ask for any more reassurance. The truth was clear, he was safe. With Coda. With Hale. With the family they had made together. The world felt quieter as the weeks passed. The base had returned to its usual rhythms, but for Echo and Hale, the weight of everything they had been through was still fresh. The missions, the danger, it all seemed far away now, like a storm that had passed but left its mark. Yet for Echo, it was something else that filled the silence. He had been writing again. It wasn't just the drawings anymore. There were words now, carefully written in the notebooks Hale had given him, words that spoke of the life he was beginning to rebuild. Words that reflected the boy's understanding of the world, the way he had come to see both the pain and the possibility in his life. One evening, after dinner, Hale found Echo in their usual spot by the fire. Coda lay at his feet, eyes half closed, content. Echo was scribbling in his notebook again, as he had been for the last few nights. Hale had noticed the boy writing with a quiet intensity, and though Echo never spoke much about it, Hale could tell that something inside him was changing. He wasn't just surviving now, he was living. He was processing everything he had experienced, everything that had shaped him into the person he was becoming. "What are you writing this time?" Hale asked as he approached. Echo didn't look up immediately. His pencil moved smoothly over the paper, as though he had been practicing for years. "A story," Echo replied quietly, finally glancing up at Hale. "A story about what?" The boy hesitated. "A soldier and a dog." Hale raised an eyebrow. "What about them?" Echo thought for a moment before answering. "They fight together. They protect people. They save lives." Hale leaned in, curious. "Sounds like a good story. Does the dog have a name?" Echo smiled faintly. "His name is Coda." Hale chuckled softly. "I see. And the soldier?" The boy paused, as though unsure of the answer. "The soldier, he's someone who doesn't quit. He doesn't leave anyone behind." Hale's heart tightened. He knew that Echo wasn't just writing about a soldier and a dog. He was writing about himself. About the bond he had built with Coda. About the strength he had found inside himself, in a world that had tried so hard to break him. "You've got a good story there, Echo," Hale said quietly. "But remember, it's not just a story. It's your life now. You've already lived it." Echo didn't respond right away. Instead, he closed the notebook and slid it under his jacket. "It's not over yet," he said softly. "There's more to write." As time passed, Echo continued to grow, to learn, and to adapt to the life that had been thrust upon him. He spent more time with Coda, bonding even further with the dog who had been his constant companion. He no longer flinched at loud noises or sudden movements. He was starting to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. One afternoon, Hale received a call from command. They needed him for a special assignment, one that would take him outside the base. The mission was critical, and though Hale was hesitant to leave Echo behind, he knew the boy was strong enough to handle it. Before he left, Hale found Echo sitting alone outside, Coda resting beside him. The boy was staring out at the horizon, lost in thought. "I'll be gone for a few days," Hale said, walking up to him. Echo looked up, his eyes steady. "Will you come back?" he asked quietly. Hale paused. "Of course I will." Echo nodded, but there was something unspoken in his eyes, a fear, a concern that Hale couldn't ignore. "I'll be fine," Echo said. "Coda will keep me safe." Hale knelt beside him, putting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know he will. And you'll keep him safe, too." Echo smiled faintly. "I will." The mission took Hale longer than expected, and though the operation was successful, there was always a lingering worry in the back of his mind. He had come to care deeply for Echo, and for the first time in his career, he found himself thinking not just of the mission, but of the boy he had promised to protect. When Hale returned to base, Echo was waiting for him. The boy didn't run to greet him like he had the first time they met, but Hale could see the quiet relief in his eyes. "You're back," Echo said simply. Hale smiled, relieved. "I told you I would be." Coda trotted up beside them, tail wagging. "You kept him safe," Hale said, looking down at the dog. Echo nodded. "We kept each other safe." That night, as the camp settled into its usual quiet, Hale sat with Echo and Coda by the fire. The flames flickered, casting long shadows across the ground. Echo had his notebook open again, but this time, he wasn't writing. He was drawing. "You've been writing a lot lately," Hale said, watching the boy's hand move across the paper. "What's the story now?" Echo glanced up, a small smile crossing his face. "It's about a soldier and a dog," he said, his voice steady. "And a boy who learned to live again." Hale felt a lump rise in his throat. "Sounds like a good story." "It's not just a story," Echo replied. "It's our story." And for the first time since they met, Hale knew that Echo had found his place in the world. He wasn't just the boy who had been saved. He was the boy who had saved himself. The following weeks at the base were different. Echo, for the first time in a long while, had begun to find his voice, not just through the whispers to Coda, but in his conversations with the other soldiers, with Hale. He spoke of the past, of the things that haunted him, but also of the future, one that he could begin to imagine. The boy who had once been so broken had now become a young man with a future of his own choosing. Hale watched the transformation with a quiet pride. He had done his part. He had been the soldier who kept the boy safe. But it was Coda who had done more. It was Coda who had taught Echo what it meant to survive, what it meant to find a reason to live again. Without Coda, Echo wouldn't have come this far. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Hale and Echo sat together on a quiet hill overlooking the base. Coda lay beside them, his body warm against the cold ground. "Do you ever think about home?" Hale asked, breaking the silence. Echo didn't look at him immediately. He was watching Coda, his fingers absently brushing through the dog's fur. "Not really," he said softly. "I think about where I'm going, though." Hale nodded, understanding. "You've come a long way, Echo." The boy smiled faintly. "I guess I have." "Where do you want to go?" Hale asked, curious. Echo turned to look at him, his eyes clear, unwavering. "Home. The place where I'm supposed to be." For a moment, the weight of his words hung in the air. Hale could see the boy was still figuring out what that meant, what it would take to truly feel at home again. But the one thing Hale was certain of was that Echo had found his place. And with Coda by his side, he'd find his way. Days passed, and the mission tempo continued. The base was still a place of constant movement, of soldiers coming and going, of orders being relayed, and threats being neutralized. But despite the chaos, the calm moments were still the most precious. The ones where Hale could sit beside Echo and Coda, where they could share a silence that spoke louder than words. One evening, as the base prepared for another operation, Hale found Echo alone by the fire, as usual. The boy had been drawing again, but this time, his sketches were different. They weren't the battle scenes or dark memories from his past. They were images of peace, a family, a home, a future. Echo looked up at Hale as he approached, his eyes brighter than they had been in months. "I think I've figured it out," he said quietly. Hale raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I'm not just surviving anymore," Echo said, his voice steady. "I'm living. I'm choosing to live." Hale sat beside him, feeling the weight of those words settle in his chest. The boy had come so far. He was no longer the frightened child hiding from his past. He had found a way forward, and that was something no one could take from him. "I'm proud of you, Echo," Hale said, his voice thick with emotion. The boy smiled. "I'm proud of me too." The following day, as the base prepped for their next mission, Hale was called into the command center for a briefing. The operation was critical, but this time, he knew something had changed. He wasn't just going to war again. He was going to protect the people who had become his family, Echo, Coda, the soldiers he had fought beside. As he stood in the briefing room, he found his mind drifting to the boy, sitting with Coda, drawing peaceful images of a future he had built from the fragments of his past. Echo had already chosen a path, one of healing, of rebuilding. Hale wasn't sure where that path would lead, but he knew that no matter what happened next, the boy had a place in the world now. A place where he belonged. The mission unfolded smoothly, and Hale's team executed their tasks with precision. But in the back of his mind, he kept returning to Echo, to the quiet strength the boy had shown in such a short amount of time. It wasn't just the bravery that had made him strong. It was his ability to forgive, to heal, to embrace the possibility of a future that was his to define. When the mission concluded, Hale returned to base, eager to check on Echo and Coda. As he approached their usual spot by the fire, he saw the boys sitting on the ground, Coda by his side, both of them watching the horizon. "You okay?" Hale asked as he approached. Echo didn't look up at first. But when he did, his face was serene, calm. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm more than okay." Hale sat down beside him. "I think you're ready for whatever comes next." Echo smiled, his gaze shifting to Coda. "I think I'm ready too." And in that moment, Hale knew that Echo had found something stronger than survival. He had found hope. He had found a family. And as long as Coda was there, by his side, nothing could break that bond.